Tomorrow morning, you wake up to your phone buzzing with emergency alerts. You check the news. Missiles have been launched. Major cities are being evacuated. Stock markets around the world have crashed. The unthinkable has happened. World War III has started. Within hours, cities are burning. Millions are dead or dying. The world as you know it is ending. Could this actually happen? What would trigger such a catastrophic conflict? And most importantly, could anyone survive it? Human history has been full of battles and wars. Some big, some small, some lasting years, others ending in days. We've fought over territory, resources, religion, ideology, and power. War seems to be woven into the fabric of human civilization. But if World War III were to happen, it would likely be humanity's biggest and most devastating battle yet. Everything about modern warfare has been amplified to terrifying levels. Advanced technology that can strike targets thousands of kilometers away with pinpoint accuracy. Massive troops numbering in the millions, trained and equipped better than any soldiers in history. And military strategy that incorporates artificial intelligence, satellite surveillance, and cyber warfare capabilities that would have been unimaginable just decades ago. The scale of destruction would be unprecedented. World War I killed approximately 17 million people. World War II killed an estimated 70 to 85 million, about 3% of the entire global population at the time. World War III, with modern weapons and a much larger global population, could potentially kill hundreds of millions or even billions. But why would something like this happen in the first place? What would drive the nations of the world into such a catastrophic conflict? What countries would join in on each side? And how would this war actually be fought with 21st century technology? Let's explore what a Third World War might actually look like. People have talked about a possible World War III for decades, and we've come frighteningly close to it actually happening more than once. The closest we came was probably during the Cold War in the 1960s, particularly during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. The United States and the Soviet Union, two nuclear superpowers with enough weapons to destroy all life on Earth multiple times over, were engaged in a tense standoff over Soviet missiles in Cuba. For 13 days, the world held its breath as the two nations came to the brink of nuclear war. Military leaders on both sides were preparing for the worst. Nuclear-armed bombers were in the air, ready to strike. Submarine commanders had orders to launch nuclear torpedoes if certain conditions were met. We were literally moments away from World War III on several occasions during that crisis. But thankfully, cooler heads prevailed. Diplomacy worked. The Soviets agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba, and the US secretly agreed to remove missiles from Turkey. The world stepped back from the edge of the abyss. Since then, we've had other close calls, times when military incidents, miscommunications, or computer errors nearly triggered nuclear exchanges. In 1983, a Soviet early warning system falsely detected incoming American missiles. The officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, made the decision not to report it as an attack, correctly reasoning it was a system malfunction. His decision likely prevented World War III. We managed to avoid global conflict during the Cold War. But let's say we aren't lucky enough to avoid it next time. When might World War III actually happen? Well, it's tough to say exactly when or how a world war would start. History shows us that major conflicts often begin with a combination of factors building up over time, then one specific trigger event that sets everything in motion. A world war could potentially start due to prominent political figures or military leaders being assassinated, similar to how Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination triggered World War I. One targeted killing could set off a chain reaction of alliances being activated and nations being drawn into conflict. Intelligence threats and espionage gone wrong could also spark conflict. If one nation discovered another was planning a massive cyber attack or developing prohibited weapons, it might launch a preemptive strike. In an age of instant communication and rapid military response, there's less time for diplomacy before situations escalate. But perhaps the most likely trigger for a future world war would be fighting over valuable resources, particularly fresh water. As climate change continues and populations grow, access to clean drinking water is becoming increasingly scarce. Nations may begin fighting over water rights, rivers that cross borders, and control of water sources. Other critical resources like rare earth minerals needed for technology, fossil fuels, or food supplies could also become flashpoints for conflict. Talking about it like this makes the chances of a war happening sound pretty likely, doesn't it? But actually, the chances are much lower than you might think. Since 1945, when World War II ended, the world has seen many different battles and conflicts. The Vietnam War, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Korean War, dozens of different civil wars in Africa, Asia, South America, and the Middle East, wars between India and Pakistan, the Yugoslav wars, the list goes on. But none of these became world wars. Why? Because in order for a world war to happen, it needs to involve the entire world, or at least most of the major powers on different sides of a global conflict. And the structure of the world has changed dramatically since 1945. The alliance systems that pulled nations into World Wars I and II don't exist in the same way anymore. Countries simply aren't as closely allied or as obligated to join wars as they used to be. During World War I, complex alliance systems meant that when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, it triggered a domino effect. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, was then at war with Germany. Britain joined when Germany invaded Belgium. Within weeks, most of Europe was at war. Today's world doesn't work quite the same way. While military alliances like NATO still exist, there's much more hesitation about getting involved in conflicts. Countries are more likely to impose sanctions, provide limited support, or stay neutral rather than immediately joining a war. Additionally, militaries are even stronger and more skilled than they were in previous world wars. Everyone knows just how devastating a full-scale war between major powers would be. The deterrent effect of modern weapons makes nations think very carefully before starting conflicts. But if World War III did somehow start, despite all these factors working against it, the casualties would be almost unimaginable. It's most likely that millions of people would die in the first days or weeks of the conflict. Modern weapons are so much more destructive than anything used in previous wars that casualty rates would be catastrophic from the very beginning, and the Earth would take decades, if not centuries, to recover from such a war. Infrastructure would be destroyed. Supply chains would collapse. Agriculture would fail in many regions. Environmental damage would be severe and long-lasting. The economic impact alone would be devastating. Global trade would cease. Financial systems would collapse. Currencies might become worthless. The interconnected global economy that we rely on for everything from food to medicine to fuel would be shattered. Survivors would face a world fundamentally changed, possibly permanently. So what would this war actually look like? What weapons and tools would countries be using in today's age that make it so much more devastating than previous conflicts? Soldiers on the ground might have exoskeletons. These are metal or composite frames worn around a soldier's body that augment their physical strength and endurance. Although this probably won't turn them into RoboCop or give them superhuman abilities, it would make it much easier for soldiers to carry heavy equipment and weapons over long distances without tiring. Some militaries are already testing exoskeleton technology. In a future war, these could be standard equipment, allowing soldiers to carry more ammunition, better armor, and heavier weapons than would normally be possible. Weapons that can shoot around corners might also be a possibility. These firearms have cameras and bent barrels that allow soldiers to aim and fire without exposing themselves to enemy fire. They could shoot from behind cover without ever revealing their position. But perhaps the most significant change from previous wars is that instead of seeing the war fought primarily on land, at sea, or in the sky, it could actually be fought in space. Militaries could fight over control of weaponized satellites that could affect what's happening below them. Satellites could be used to disable enemy communications, jam GPS signals, destroy other satellites, or even direct energy weapons at ground targets. Control of space could be the decisive factor in a modern war, giving one side enormous advantages in intelligence, communication, and targeting. Although a lot of this stuff sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, we should keep in mind that these weapons are very real and very scary, and hopefully no one will ever need to use them. After all, things like this are meant to kill people as efficiently as possible. But here's something interesting. there may not be many human soldiers on the ground at all in a future world war. The war of the future might primarily be fought on computers rather than traditional battlefields. Drones, artificial intelligence, and autonomous robots could be the main combatants, with humans directing strategy from safe locations far from the fighting. Military drones are already widely used for reconnaissance and strikes. In a future war, swarms of thousands of small drones might be deployed, overwhelming enemy defenses through sheer numbers. AI-controlled robots could engage in combat without risking human lives. There's also a significant chance that acts of war in the future might not involve any traditional violence at all. Instead, the war could be fought through cyberattacks. Hacking into other countries' computer systems to steal intelligence, disrupt communications, or spread misinformation could be primary weapons. Power grid shutdowns, disabling water treatment facilities, crashing financial systems, taking control of infrastructure, all of this could be done through cyber warfare without firing a single bullet. Imagine waking up one day to find that your country's electrical grid has been taken offline by hackers from an enemy nation. No power means no communication, no refrigeration for food and medicine, no water pumping, no heating or cooling, no transportation systems. Modern civilization would grind to a halt within days, all without a single bomb being dropped. This is arguably more terrifying than traditional warfare, because it's harder to defend against and harder to attribute to a specific attacker. Cyber warfare leaves no craters, no bodies, but can be just as devastating. So what would a third world war actually be about? What would nations be fighting over? As mentioned earlier, it could very likely have to do with resources, specifically water. Fresh water is such a scarce yet increasingly valuable resource that nations may begin to fight over it as supplies continue to deplete. Right now, approximately 2 billion people worldwide already lack access to safe drinking water. That number is projected to grow as populations increase and climate change alters weather patterns, creating droughts in some regions and floods in others. Rivers that cross international borders could become flashpoints for conflict. The Nile, the Tigris-Euphrates, the Indus, the Ganges, the Mekong, all of these vital water sources flow through multiple countries. Disputes over water rights and usage could escalate into armed conflict. Nations with control over water sources could hold enormous power over their neighbors. Dams built upstream can affect water flow to countries downstream. In times of scarcity, the temptation to secure water resources by force might become irresistible. We're already seeing tensions over water rights in various regions. A future World War III could very well be fought over access to this most basic necessity of life. But hopefully, World War III wouldn't go on forever. So how could it end? Well, one reason, and actually the main reason, why a world war hasn't happened yet since 1945 has to do with nuclear weapons. During World War II, the United States dropped nuclear bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 100,000 people instantly and many more from radiation sickness in the following weeks and months. The cities involved took decades to recover and rebuild. But the 2 nuclear bombs used in World War II would pale in comparison to the modern nuclear weapons we have today. The Hiroshima bomb had a yield of about 15 kilotons. Today's nuclear weapons can have yields of hundreds of kilotons or even megatons, literally hundreds of times more powerful. And there are nearly 14,000 nuclear warheads around the world, held mostly by the United States, Russia, and China, with smaller arsenals in France, the United Kingdom, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and possibly Israel. A nation can have all the resources, all the soldiers, and all the strategy they want. But if a nuclear weapon gets dropped on them, it's game over for that nation. Entire cities vaporized in seconds, millions killed instantly. Radiation making vast areas uninhabitable for generations. And here's the truly terrifying part. If one country drops a nuclear weapon, what's to stop another country from doing the same in retaliation? And then another country launches nukes in response, and another, and another. Within hours or days, nuclear missiles would be flying in all directions. This is what's called mutually assured destruction. The idea that any use of nuclear weapons would inevitably lead to the complete annihilation of both the attacker and the defender. Soon, the world would be destroyed. Not just the countries at war, but but potentially all of human civilization. Nuclear winter, where smoke and ash from nuclear explosions block out the sun for years, would cause global temperatures to plummet, crops to fail worldwide, and mass starvation even in regions far from the fighting. So who would win World War III? Absolutely no one. A full-on World War III involving major nuclear powers would have a massive impact on the world as a whole. It's safe to say that the world would never be the same afterward. Assuming there even is an afterward for human civilization, there would be no victors, only survivors trying to pick up the pieces of a shattered world. The concept of winning a nuclear world war is meaningless when the alternative is the extinction of human civilization. This is actually one of the most important reasons why World War III hasn't happened and likely won't happen. Everyone loses in such a conflict, so there's no rational incentive to start one. Conclusion: don't lose sleep over it, but try not to lose sleep over this. After all, a third world war like this with dozens of countries involved is incredibly unlikely to start tomorrow or any time in the near future. The factors preventing world war are much stronger than the factors that might cause one. Economic interdependence, nuclear deterrence, international institutions, and the sheer horror of what modern warfare would mean all work together to make world war extremely unlikely. If two countries get into a fight, it's more likely that other countries that aren't directly involved will stay that way and let those nations resolve their conflict themselves, rather than being drawn into a global conflagration. Wars are terrible, devastating events that cause immense suffering. Let's continue to work toward resolving conflicts through diplomacy, cooperation, and understanding rather than violence. The alternative, a third world war, is simply too catastrophic to contemplate. If you found this exploration of a frightening hypothetical scenario thought-provoking, subscribe for more investigations into the biggest questions facing humanity. Stay curious and work toward peace.